the book writing thing actually came about because I had my child, and I think he's never gonna see any of the stuff or read any of the stuff I grew up with. There's nothing here that would make him see himself like a reflection of himself. There was nothing. That's actually what started me to write children's books first.
That was the voice of Kristyn Maslog-Levis, the guest on this episode of The Knowledge Mill. I'm your host, Greg Yoakum. Kristyn Maslog-Levis is a marketing and communications coordinator for a nonprofit organization, author, ghostwriter, and former journalist. She has previously worked as a TV reporter in the Philippines and a radio broadcaster with SBS in Sydney, where she still occasionally does voiceovers. Several of her stories have landed in the New York Times and Al Jazeera. While working as a broadcast journalist in the Philippines, Kristyn covered bomb threats, rebel insurgencies, and political rivalries. She finished her master's degree in communication at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore under the ASEAN scholarship. Kristyn self-published 2 children's picture books prior to the release of her first young adult novel, The Girl Between Two Worlds, with Anvil Publishing in 2016. Her second book, The Girl Between Light and Dark, and third book, The Search for Adarna, were released by the same publisher in 2018 and 2019, respectively. Kristyn is represented by Annabelle Barker Literary Agency. She started her Doctor of Philosophy candidature in 2021 with the University of Technology, Sydney for creative writing under the Australian Research Training Program, focusing on cultural diversity in children's literature in Australia. Her thesis, entitled The Missing Books in Children's Literature in Australia, an Australian Filipino author's journey to representation, is a creative and critical work that questions the limited opportunities given to children's and young adult authors from culturally and linguistically diverse communities in the traditional publishing industry in Australia. The thesis argues that culturally and linguistically diverse authors face barrier after barrier, first within their own personal circumstance, then from the wider community, as well as the barriers within traditional publishing houses. For culturally and linguistically diverse authors to have a chance at being represented in the children's and young adult space, big changes are needed from the industry and its adjacent spaces. This episode of The Knowledge Mill was recorded in my office at UTS on September 15th, 2023. Show notes, including links to more information on some of the topics that Kristyn and I discuss, can be found at theknowledgemill.com/episode 7. That's episode and the numeral 7. Hello, Kristyn. Welcome to the program.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to jump right in. You are doing a PhD on cultural diversity in children's literature.
Yes.
Can you please tell us how this came to be?
Pandemic happened.
Right.
So I've always actually started thinking about doing a PhD, but just didn't know where to start. And then during the pandemic, UTS did an open day online. And so I saw the ad and I just went in and joined that. And that's how I found out about the process of applying for a PhD. And so when I was creating my proposal, I thought, okay, the first thing I saw was there wasn't a lot of fantasy books in Australia for kids that has creatures from other cultures. So that was my original proposal, actually. Fantasy book for kids with Filipino mythological creatures.
Yeah, okay.
Because I've written 3 YA books, young adult books, published by a Philippine publisher. So it's a series. The 4th book actually now is with the publisher, which is the last of the series. So I thought something around the mythological creatures I've written before. And so when the proposal got accepted, that's when I started doing the research, and then I realized, okay, this might not be the thing I want to pursue, because while doing the initial research for the topic, I found out a couple of things. I thought maybe I can pivot into something else that I think is more important for me right now. And my supervisor did say, do something passionate, because by the second, third year, you're going to want to quit. Yep. So I'm like, okay, something you're really passionate about, this you're going to push. And, when you're looking for a reason, you'll find it, because this is what you're passionate about. So I ended up pivoting the topic to Australian Filipino writers in children's and young adult literature in Australia, because the initial research I found that there was really only one Australian Filipino author in the last 20 something years.
Right.
So I looked at the database in Australia, and it was just, they were just starting to update the database on culturally diverse books for children. So there wasn't a lot out there. So I started looking in Australia, and then in the last almost 3 years now, I found five Australian Filipino authors in that area. And I'm like, well, why are there only 5 in the last 21 years when our community, the Australian Filipino community, is like the 3rd largest Asian community in Australia? So it was like, okay, well, what's stopping us from writing in this genre? What's stopping the publishing industry from finding us, from publishing us, and the more I dug into it, the more I found that it's not just a problem in my community. It's a problem for a lot of marginalized communities in Australia, especially First Nations authors. So it kind of ended up from there. I mean, I have to just narrow it down to the Australian Filipino community, because otherwise I'm never gonna.
It's too many PhDs.
Yes, it's never gonna stop. But the more I looked into it, the more it's like, oh, there's a lot of papers that could be done in this area in the future. And it's been really, I guess, disheartening would be the word I'd use, to see how much, I guess, how many barriers there are for Australian Filipino writers out there to get into the publishing industry, to be traditionally published in Australia. And then in my research, I discovered, you as kids, you can't be what you can't see or read. And it's only really just started, these 5 authors only really just started coming out of the We Need Diverse Books movement came about. So maybe in the last 5-6 years. And it's been trickling in really slowly. I mean, the publishing industry is very slow. But so the numbers have been trickling in really slowly over the years. The funny thing is that when I found 1, and then I found 2, and then 3, and then when I reached around 4 or 5, I did think maybe we have enough to represent the over 300,000 people in Australia. Maybe 5 is enough. It's like I had to change my mentality. Yeah. Because I felt like, we're given a space. 5 is okay. And you kind of think, wait a minute. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey personally as well. Yeah. To think hey, why did I think that having 5 is enough? Why did I think that, or why did I feel that? I kind of have to look at how I feel about this as well. So yeah, that's how I ended up choosing this topic.
Yeah. Okay. How has that informed your research? Because you got over this, so you felt like, 5 isn't bad. And then you thought, wait, no, we could do better. We deserve more. So has that informed your PhD at all, or your approach?
Yes. I had to think about what I wanted to do. So the methodology I'm using for my thesis is autoethnography, which in itself is a bit, I guess, contentious space as well in academia. But I had to really reflect on why I wanted to use my own experience first, because of course I could start with interviewing the 5 authors that I know in this space and do that methodology for my work. But after a lot of introspection and conversations with my supervisors and other PhD students, I'm like, my experience in as a published author, as an author trying to get published in Australia in this space, has been very, very interesting, and there's a lot of things I learned. So my background is journalism. I'm a trained, that's what I graduated with, bachelor's degree in journalism. And I used that experience to apply myself in the fiction writing. So journalism, fiction writing, very different worlds. So when I first started, I learned by going to conferences, festivals, talking to other writers, learning as much as possible about the writing itself and the industry and how it all worked.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess, my journey as an author is very different from others, where they kind of stumble into it not knowing where to go, who to ask. For me, I looked at it as a project, like trying to learn as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, over the years, I've gathered so much information about the industry and about the fiction writing and about the stumbling blocks that marginalized authors face, or even, Australian authors face as well. So it's all those information that I wanted to collate. And so that's why I think autoethnography would be the best place for me to start for this thesis. Having said that, I already have a paper in mind for future stuff where I could dive deeper into the experiences of the 5 authors that I've looked at for these thesis as an example of children's authors in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I kind of have to just again focus on something so that it doesn't end up being such a huge project that's overwhelming and never gonna finish. Yeah. So, but I am very curious about how all these authors ended up where they are right now, what the barriers they faced, where are they similar to what I faced as well, because each author has a different journey, each author has a different background, so I wanted to know if we had similarities in terms of, and there are some things that are similar based on the stuff that I've already looked at. For one, we already have something similar statement when you pitch your story or book. We already have something similar. It's like, a token Asian in the next publishing round,
right?
Stuff like that. So, in my, I guess, attending conference and stuff, talking to other authors from Asia, from different communities, I'm seeing themes around stuff that stopped us, or stuff that stopped them from being published as well, and it's the same kind of theme, different levels, and one of the biggest barriers I saw was language. I mean, that would be the biggest, language, because you're still expected to write in English. And if you're a writer from a different country, if you're a writer where your first language is in English, that's it. I mean, my first language isn't English. English is actually my third language. So I grew up talking in my dialect, and then I had to talk in the national language in Tagalog in the Philippines, and then English. So that was, and even until now when I write, I still find some things really tricky. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm going through that, and I've been doing this for a long time in English, I can just imagine other writers who want to tell their story and share the story who don't have that same background,
Yeah.
So there were so many things that I found. I'm like, it kind of very discouraging. At one point I was like, oh, why am I doing this? It's like, let's just stop writing.
You just keep finding problems. Hey, the more you explore, and then your PhD then is the autoethnographic study, and the other author stories. That's kind of the next step for you after the PhD. Is that?
I'm hoping, yes. I have reached out to them, and I've told them what I'm trying to do, and they're very excited to learn that I'm starting this, because I actually haven't seen any Australian Filipino thesis in this area. So I've been looking at other academic papers, and just so far I haven't seen autoethnographic papers similar to what I'm doing. There are a lot in America for American Latino communities, but I'm not sure. Like in Australia, no one's really done this. So the authors, I've actually become friends with them because I go to their book launches. Like I talk to them on social media, and we kind of started to discuss, like, why is that? Why aren't there a lot? And like, I noticed one of the authors didn't even say that she's Filipino in her bio.
Right.
Yeah, so these 5, I don't even know if it's just these 5, because there are like people who don't want to mention their background.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know what the reason is behind that. Maybe for fear of, I don't know, being racist attacks, or maybe anything that commented from other people. So it's kind of hard. I mean, if you base it on a database, even the database is not that accurate with information as well. So it's been it's almost like word of mouth or investigative journalism. It's like Googling someone, trying to see if there's any Filipino-ness, and then actually private messaging them and say, "Hey, are you Filipino?"
Yeah, without because obviously they've made that decision to
not publicize
so,
their identity.
That's, it could be invasive, or it could feel like the attack they're trying to avoid. Maybe. Yeah. But it sounds like you've found some people that are receptive, and it sounds like you almost have like an informal community of practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's why I want to provide. The next stage would be to provide a space for these 5 authors and focus on their stories. In-depth interviews with each of them and their author journeys, because they all have different backgrounds. I mean, one of them who recently just launched her book is actually a doctor. So I'm like, well, why are you writing this if you're a doctor? She's always wanted to write books. So it's like, very different journeys for each of them, and that would be so interesting to find out how they ended up here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads me into, because when we say cultural diversity, that of course can have many different interpretations. And as you've been sort of walking me through the work that you're doing and liaising with these authors and building up this community, I guess from your perspective in your work so far, what would break through this barrier? Because is it a matter of these books needing to find their audience, or the books maybe not being written for the right audience? What do you reckon could be the next step?
Oh, there's several aspects to it, like in terms of the education department's chosen books, the publishing industry's champions. So first thing in itself from the community, a lot of us have the similar themes. We grew up being told there's no money in writing, so don't be a writer. So there's a lot of that common themes of like, oh well, there's no money in that, you should do something else. So that in itself is stopping people from actually pursuing writing.
All in,
and maybe one day you wake up, you're 40, 45 and thinking, I want to write, and then you start the process really late. So that's like one of the barriers. The community itself, it depends on where the priorities are. Arts, from my experience, arts is not a very big, like, even when I did journalism, my dad was like, there's no money in this, right? I was like, yeah, but I want to do this. So my dad's like, yeah, fine, okay. It's always about where you're going to have a stable income. So that's the priority. So that's from the community itself. And then, the publishing industry, and the other issue is you have no champions in the industry. So people who read, it's from the people who read the manuscript that you've created. If there's a champion for that, if not, it's just going to get in the slush pile. No one's going to read it. If the staff in the publishing industry is not culturally diverse, you have no champions already. So no one's going to read it. You're not going to even get through the first gate. And that's been also one of the discoveries that the research is that where are the diverse editors? Where are, what happens? Because, you're not in the room with them. You don't actually know what happens in there, but something happens in the publishing industry that's stopping this going up and discovering. We're still very used to the old ways of discovering authors. There needs to be new ways of discovering these authors. Sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction, like Black Lives Movement. Oh, let's get a black writer. Like, you know, it's not really...
Fill quotas.
Yes, to fill quotas. And I did go through we already have something similar. I had this conversation with an American Korean author in a conference. And, she was told, we already have something similar. And when she saw the Something Similar book, it wasn't anywhere.
Not at all.
It was just Asian. That was it.
Right.
Because it was Asian. And she's like, it was American Chinese and she's American Korean, but they already have an Asian one. So therefore, the box has been ticked. So in the publishing industry itself, we don't know what's going on. Do we have champions in there? And if they have the token Asian editor, it's only one out of how many, you know?
Right.
And again, that's beyond our control as writers. So that's another aspect. And then in schools, what kind of books are they providing kids or opening up for kids to read? Because if kids don't have access to it, they don't know what's out there. If they don't train teachers on how to discuss these books so that it's not tokenistic, that's another aspect to it. But who provides this training for these teachers? So it's so many levels that it's kind of overwhelming, really, to think about it.
Because there are the broader social problems of bias.
Yes.
If it's implicit bias or explicit bias,
Yeah.
That permeate every level of society and all different industries.
Yes.
And there's different intersections as well about, we're talking about Filipino Australian writers, but then also female Filipino Australian writers, and now there's even more systemic bias.
Yes.
It's a system problem. Hey.
It's it's quite. There's been several times in this research where I'm like, no, I don't want to do this anymore.
It can feel like, well, I think that the work that you're doing is important because at least it's moving things in a positive direction. Whereas to do nothing is to just accept, is to say 5 is enough.
Yes.
And
yes.
And you obviously don't want to do that. So.
No. That was a really good introspection when I said 5 is enough. Is that like colonial mentality as well? Like,
we should be lucky to.
Yeah, we should be lucky. Let's not ask for more in case they pull back to 5.
Yeah.
And now we have nothing. Like, we're always asking for space. It's funny because one of my essays was accepted for a anthology, a Filipino Australian anthology that was published this year. And one of the things that this group, they're called Entry Pinais, one of the things they said was, well, they won't give us a seat on the table, let's make our own table. So they created an anthology and had a call out for Australian Filipino writers to give them stories, essays of their own migrant experience. And that was very interesting. Like, oh yeah, we can make space for us ourselves.
I was going to ask you about, is self-publishing maybe?
That is one of the questions, and that is one of the subheaders for the thesis. And it is, it's not like I'm not looking at it. It is something that I'm looking at because, one, apparently there's a report that came out that self-published authors now make a lot of money if they do it right. And again, I've researched that because I did self-publish 2 books before I became traditionally published. I don't find it hard because that's my industry, like journalism, printing, publishing. I have that background.
Yeah.
But I guess my idea is that the publishing industry has gatekeepers, and I want those gatekeepers to acknowledge our existence. And it's not that I can't self-publish. I can if I want to. I just want to keep pushing and keep knocking on the gate to say, hey, let us in.
Yeah.
Like, and then when I get through that, I'm like, yeah, okay, then I'll self-publish the rest. It's more...
Now that I'm in, I'll do it my way.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's more like the acknowledgement that these communities exist. We have kids wanting to see themselves reflected in the books they read. provide that for them? If you're in the publishing industry, why not provide that for these kids?
Yeah.
So they can see themselves reflected in the pages of the books they read.
That's what I was thinking. And I'm just going off the top of my head here. This is your space. Is that it seems like maybe self-publishing or something like it might be that battering ram to bring the gate down, because if you, my undergrad's in economics, so I have a tendency to see things as supply and demand. But if you create the supply and the conditions are right, then the demand can follow. But you need the supply first. Like there's got to be, we see a similar thing in the sport world where there's a lot of women's sport competitions popping up, and they haven't been there, and so the first generation of the player pool talent is not the highest that it will be. But you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was thinking, is maybe if self-publishing, but as you touched on, you had that journalism background, because if you self-publish, a book and you don't tell anybody, then did you really publish a book? So you also have to be social media manager, marketing manager, PR manager.
Yes.
Not everybody has that diverse.
Yes, it costs a lot of money to self-publish and to do all the marketing and all that, and the knowledge and the time. So there is that downside, because if you're traditionally published, there's a marketing arm, there's a PR arm, distribution arm, and that you don't have to think about as an author. Yeah. You can just focus on writing, engaging with the readers, doing talks and reaching those readers.
And that's why you want to get through the gates, to tap into that.
Exactly, to have that. I mean, I do know that there are authors that were traditionally published first and then branched out to self-publishing because they just get more money, and because they already have a follower. But if no one knows you, you're new. And that's another thing. It's a bit confusing for me as well, because my books are published in the Philippines. My publisher is from the Philippines, although my books are, you can buy them anywhere around the world. Does that make me an Australian author, or does that make me
right?
Am I published author here, or am I a debut author here? It's.
Have you found resistance on that front?
I've heard myself being marketed as a debut author.
Okay.
Even after the 3 published books. But here, in the Philippines, I'm a best-selling author.
Right.
In Australia, I'm a debut author. So I'm kind of like, well, what does...
Yeah.
I don't understand. So there's that, because the industry has to be able to market you. And those marketing terms, again, that you have to think about. And you think as an author, you think, oh, I just need to write good books and edit books. But no, there's a lot of things that comes along with being an author. And I wouldn't have discovered that if not for me attending all these conferences and doing the research, like seeing this side of the industry. Yeah, it does get quite overwhelming.
Absolutely. Before we started recording, you mentioned that you are working on a book as a component of your thesis. So you have the autoethnographic, kind of what you might call the traditional empirical research side of things. But then you're writing this book as a creative component. Could you kind of walk us through, because I feel like that's happening at the intersection of everything you're discussing, right? You're trying to become an established author in Australia, but in a way that acknowledges that you already are an established author. So where does the book fit in and into all of that, as well as your thesis?
Yeah, it's a bit. When I first started, I kind of think, okay, this is what I want to write about, and then this is the topic of my thesis. How do they connect? How do they intersect? The creative component actually had 3 changes. The initial one that I mentioned before we started recording was the fantasy with the mythological creatures. That was the first idea, and then I thought, okay, I don't want to do this idea. What am I trying to say here? So I had to dig deeper, and then it came to another idea, more streamlined. It's like, no, still not. So until I walked the dogs one night and kind of hit me while walking the dogs, I was like, okay, this is perfect. so the creative component had to tie in with the thesis, the journey, the barriers of being a marginalized author, and the effects of it on readers not being able to see themselves. So the creative component revolves around identity. So this child's identity, this child's what am I if I can't fit in anywhere here? So the creative component is realistic middle grade fiction, revolving around this little girl who finds herself in a foster home. Her migrant parents are dead, and so she's like, well, we moved here because it's greener pasture. That's what my parents said, but now that they're gone, should I still be here? Am I Australian, or should I just go back to my relatives in the Philippines where I have family? Like, so she's grappling with her identity. She's grappling with where she belongs. And there's a lot of things happening in her life. School stuff, home stuff, friend stuff.
Universal experiences.
Yes, yes. But at the heart of it is grappling for where does she belong now that her parents are not there to guide her and tell her this is where you belong. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing that, I'm like, I kind of put myself in it because I'm first generation migrant. So when I came to Australia, it's on my own because, fell in love with an Aussie. Didn't want to bring him there because there was no job there for him. So we had to move here. And I'm kind of like, well, I'm on my own. What if this is a kid here with just two parents? Because I'm seeing a lot of that migrants coming here, parents with a kid. If your parents disappear, then you're a kid. You're on your own. What do you do? It kind of ended up like that's where it started. Like, how do you see yourself in the community you're in if you're just on your own and your parents are not there to tell you, guide you? Yeah.
You don't have that connection to...
Yeah. So that's how it ended up. And the feedback so far is like, it's a very sad story. It's like, it's a very sad story. But there's a lot of stuff there that is partially experienced by my son as well, because we have no family here. Basically, my family's still in the Philippines. So he grew up without cousins here and stuff like that. So there were a lot of that identity. And I do ask him every now and then, do you consider yourself Filipino? It's like, yeah, of course I do. But I don't, like, why does he say that?
Right. What is his idea of Filipino?
Yes. Which we'll probably have more conversation when he's older. Same as your son.
Yeah, that's, as you're telling me this, it's very similar. I'm very proud of where I'm from, and my heritage is an Appalachian. But my son, he may not... My parents have moved away from where we're from. My sister's about to move away. I'm not sure he would ever go to where I'm from in West Virginia. And so while I will explain to him where I'm from and what it means to me, and that he's half Appalachian, I like to call him an Appalachian Australian. I don't know what that, that's a thing that he'll say, I'm an Appalachian Australian, but I don't know that it will mean much to him. It definitely won't mean what I would like it to mean.
Yeah. Because it's like, what does it mean? More, you have the same food, or you eat the same thing, or traits, or so this grappling with identity kind of thing. I'm trying. I wrote it and trying to look at it from a young person's perspective. So that was very interesting. One amazing thing I did get from this whole PhD experience is I was able to do a 10-week workshop with an American Filipino author whose work I really admire. So,
are you able to say who it is?
Yes, Erin Entrada Kelly. So Newbery medalist, New York Times bestselling, and I love her books. I wouldn't have had that opportunity because of the cost that comes with that. So being able to do this and having that opportunity to do that 10-week program was really amazing for not just for the process, for my process, because I don't have fiction writing experience, fiction writing background. I basically learn everything on the go. So having that workshop with her was it didn't only improve the writing, but also gave perspective on the characters I was writing about, because she was a cultural insider. So she made comments about the relationships between the characters and how familiar it was that, she did this. She's like, you described and let everyone know the protagonist's identity without mentioning skin color or facial features, just by what she did and what she said and the stuff that she ate. And I'm like, didn't even occur to me. Like, but they, and the relationship between the characters, and they were like, that's what my kid says. Or that's what I had with my aunt. Like, all these little things that makes the character authentic. Because that was the other thing that I saw through the research as well. While there are characters that are, Australian Filipino or Filipino in some books, they're not really authentic. You could put any race on them, and there's really nothing that makes them.
The stereotypes.
Yeah. There's the Filipino-ness is not really authentic. So that was the other thing that I wanted to, because I've read a couple of books and I'm like, this could be anyone, any race. It's very stereotypical. It's very it's just very and I get pissed off sometimes. So like,
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I started asking you about cultural diversity earlier, and then I sort of pivoted and asked a different question. But we've circled back around to the original question I wanted to ask, which is, if we're talking about cultural diversity, specifically in children's books in your project, what are the benefits of the diversity that you're trying to understand and enhance? Is this for a Filipino reader to see themselves in the story and maybe understand themselves better and their place in Australia? Is it for an Australian reader who maybe doesn't know any Filipino people and can learn about their culture and what it is to be Filipino Australian? All of the above.
All of the above. Yes, all of the above. The reflection thing is big for Australian Filipino kids for me, because when I've been here 20 years, and very rare in this 20 years I've been here that I've read any characters Filipino, seen anything on TV, heard anyone on the radio like that. So I'm thinking, I'm a grown adult, and I was just thinking, well, what would a child's experience be? All these years not seeing themselves represented, and I think that's the main reason, and especially since the book writing thing actually came about because I had my child, and I think he's never gonna see any of the stuff or read any of the stuff I grew up with. There's nothing here that would make him see himself like a reflection of himself. There was nothing. That's actually what started me to write children's books first, and then young adult books later on. So he kind of, I blame him. He started it all. So yeah, because of that reflection thing that I thought he should, see these things, read these things. And then the other thing is the constant explanation as well. Like, what's a Filipino? Like, we're known for Imelda's shoes. I'm like, really? And that's also part of it. It would provide other people with, a window to Filipino-ness.
Yeah.
So
a more nuanced view than just the stereotypical.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I was interviewed about my young adult books, after a couple of them, the second and third book came out, I was asked, like, so why did you write this book this way? Because my young adult books, they're Filipino monsters in America. And a lot of the readers said, no one's ever done this before. Because it's always the Filipino monsters. You see them in the Philippines only, in the cinemas there, in the books there, in comics there. But no one's taken out these monsters outside of the Philippines. So I put them in America. I made them eat Americans. and they were like, so why did you do this? And I'm like, because over the years, all I've seen are mythological creatures or monsters from Western countries. Your vampires and your werewolves and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, our monsters are pretty horrible. And if they look like humans during the day, they can migrate anywhere in the world. So why can't there be, a migrant applying for a U.S. visa? Then when he or she gets to the U.S., starts eating people there. Like, what's stopping that, right?
Yeah.
In a global community. That's kind of how it started in my head. And I'm like, that's introducing this. That's why the first idea for the creative work was mythological creatures. So I wanted to bring that fantasy side into books around the world for mythological creatures from the Philippines. So yeah, there's so much, I guess, the culture side. There's a lot of stuff that other cultures would find surprising or entertaining or scared the pants out of them.
Yeah.
Really. So it's stuff like, why not? Why not bring it out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can learn so much about other cultures, other people by their extreme, what makes you fall in love, what makes you afraid. Like the extreme emotions, I think, and how people react in those scenarios
exactly
says a lot about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite big. So you're actually then expanding the whole app, because you mentioned Dracula, and that's we take for granted that Dracula's not American, but so there is a precedent for monsters, quote unquote, to come from foreign lands. We should expand our view, find other monsters and cryptids and mythological creatures.
Yeah. So when I started reading young adult books and children's books, I found there was this one series I read, children's book, where one of the monsters was so similar to ours. And I had to stop, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm reading a monster that is very similar. And I found out the author's like Australian Indonesian, I think.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh my God. And so I actually Googled it. And so there's like a lot of similarities in the monsters, and I was so surprised. And because I've been reading books for a long time. So it's the first time I've actually read a monster that's not, this is the common monsters you read about. And I was like, oh, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the right time to bring all that to light. Yeah.
Other people could be having that same experience you had as a reader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
It only took 40-something years.
But that's, that's another thing that we were saying before we started recording, is just how you follow your passions and then
you end up there.
Yeah. And sometimes a thing that I find myself saying often, and I wanted to say it earlier in this conversation, is that you don't know what you don't know. And it's a spin on, if you can't, if you can see it, you can be it. It's almost like the reverse of that. It's, well, if you don't know you can be it, then you don't even know to try to see it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and it's the whole supply side thing as well, where it has to be there. And then getting people's eyeballs on it, that's a whole different ball game, but that's where you come in as well with the publishing. Yeah,
because the industry previously believed that marginalized communities don't read books, so that's why it's like, oh no, there's no audience for that. There are no readers for that. There's no audience for that. But now we find there's an audience for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a terrible and reductive view anyway in the first place, to just write off entire populations of people
who don't read.
Yeah. How insulting.
I know. And I was actually quite surprised when I started reading all these papers and all these reports and all these articles. I'm like, and I never really followed it before I started my thesis. In my head, when I started writing fiction, was just to write fiction, because that's just what authors do. They just write, then get published, and that's it. So that
it's easy.
Yeah, super easy. That's all I did. I didn't even focus on like all these diversity issues in the industry. And then when I started reading all these papers and reports, and not just in Australia but in the UK and in the US, I'm like, oh my God. And I was so disheartened. I'm like, then why am I doing this? Why am I writing when there's like so little chance of me getting there or getting published? Basically the popular author's lightning in a bottle kind of thing.
Right.
So then you have to actually go back to the purpose why you're doing the thesis. Go back to it and say, well, this is going to be a brick to that foundation. That's it. So I had to change my mentality about what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So that I could keep going and not collapse and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go home. I said, this is just a brick.
Yeah.
And other people will start creating these bricks. And eventually, maybe when I'm dead, this is going to be a full house.
But if you don't put your brick down, then there's not a place for the next person. And
Exactly. So let's just have this brick. Another person can see this in the future and build on it, and we'll just keep building and building and building. So I had to destroy my delusions. The delusions in my head, I had to like compact it.
Do you feel better about things now, though, with your new attitude?
Yeah, it's more bite-sized, I guess. You can do anything if you just bite at, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So
yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
So I kind of had to just push it back. It's like, look, this is it, just a break. And I do feel a lot better. I enjoy writing more now that there's no bigger, super huge purpose. Just going back to storytelling and seeing the process as that enjoyable process again, and not thinking about all these, what will it mean, like repercussions and grand things, nothing like that. So,
just the immediate impact.
Yeah. Having said that, though, the books I've been writing, because I did finish 2 other books aside from the creative component, I'm starting to think about things differently. Like, okay, I'm writing this story. What am I trying to say about this? Or how would this help? It's not just like telling stories for telling stories' sake. Which makes it more introspective than normal. I thought when I first started that, you just write stories because it's fun, After going through this whole PhD process, you kind of start to think about, what is this character trying to say, or what is this story trying to say? So I'm starting to look at things quite.
You've really got the philosophical side of
I
Doctor
know,
of Philosophy.
This sucks so much. It sucks so much.
Well, that sort of brings us back around to the PhD itself. So you mentioned that you are here at UTS. We have a 3-stage framework. Stage 1 confirms the candidature. Stage 2 in the business school confirms your readiness to collect data. But it sounds like you have now done stage 2. You mentioned before we started recording.
So I'm waiting for stage 3.
Yeah. So what's the timeline? What's happening on the home stretch here? How are you feeling about things?
I was telling my son the other day, it's like, I want to do this. I want to get this done already. I want to finish. I don't want to do this anymore. It's like my son's like 14 and it's like, I'm still in high school, Mom. Like, yeah. It does feel like things are starting to wrap up. But like you said previously as well, wrap up, but there's like so many things to wrap up and so many endings. And I haven't done a PhD before, so I don't really know what to expect afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have all these questions about, okay, after I finish this, then what after that?
Yeah.
So right now, I'm just getting the feedback from stage 2 and incorporating the feedback into the thesis. And I got really good feedback from my stage 2 assessment, so that was really good.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I'm just trying to put that together. And then I'm waiting for feedback on the creative component.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I'm going to edit the novel. And hopefully my agent will like it and we will get it published before I finish my PhD. Well, that's the dream anyway.
Nice one. Is that a, do you need to publish it before you finish? Or
No, not really.
That's just your personal...
It's a personal goal.
Yeah. Yeah, nice one.
But then I also thinking that if that happens, then I'll have to change my thesis. Because you have to add...
Oh, right.
Yeah, because it's autoethnography. You kind of have to add what happens to
of course.
the creative work. It's like, But yeah, that's kind of is the dream. Having that mentor as well for the creative component it's a huge help.
This is separate to your PhD supervisors?
Yes, separate too. Because I didn't know that being a PhD student, you get all these things that you don't know that you get until you ask.
Yeah.
And then, which I wouldn't have had been access to or been able to do had I not done this. So yeah, that's been very, very helpful and very exciting.
It's as well. I had my stage 3 experience was similar, where it just felt like there were 30 fire hoses blasting me at once, and it also coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. So it was. I submitted my thesis at the end of June 2020.
Oh, wow.
So a lot was happening, and I was trying to publish articles at the same time, but I had this simultaneous feeling of this is awful, and I want all of this to stop, but also enjoy this.
Yes.
You only get to do exactly what you want to do this one time if you're an academic, to just research whatever you want and to get access to the workshop that you were able to go to and to go to these conferences and to just live in your own thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then I realized as well, which is one of the things my supervisor said, you know that when you read books, that's part of your
that's
PhD.
Work.
I'm like, what? Because this is your topic, and if you read that, that is amazing.
That's what I tried to tell my wife about watching the footy, because I was doing sport management. It's like, well, this is technically
this
work.
Is work, yes.
I don't think she was buying it. Well, so what's when are you looking at submitting then?
Oh my God! What if I tell you? I might jinx it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, or if you want to put the deadline out there, and then everyone's gonna hold you accountable.
No, if my supervisor's here, just like, I'm not sure.
Sounds like you said it was going to be then.
Yes, and then you're not following through. There is a plan. There's a plan in place. I've spoken to my supervisors, and that's the plan that's the goal we're gonna set.
Yep.
It looks like it's doable at the moment, because I still have that journalism ethics where you have a buffer time, so you're not doing things the last minute. I'm quite deadline driven.
Yep. So
I've set deadlines for myself, thinking, okay, we need to do this by this, and it looks like we're on track. Knock on wood. Yeah, if you jinx it, I blame you.
I won't say any more then, because I don't want to be responsible for a jinx.
Yes.
Well, so other than the PhD, you mentioned that you've been to some conferences. Is there anything else on the horizon? You noted that you wanted to maybe pursue some work with the other authors that you had contacted. What's on the horizon for you beyond the PhD?
It's blank at the moment. I don't really know. I mean, well, the certain thing is I'm not going to stop writing. I love the process. I love writing. I actually have a couple of manuscripts that is waiting to be edited because I'm doing the PhD. Everything is kind of just, it's been on a 3-4 year hold. It's been on hold for a long time.
The back burner has quite a few pots on it now.
Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that. But I did submit the 4th book in my series with my publishers, so nice. I'm waiting to hear back from them on that one. And I think that would need to be edited, and then the creative component would need to be edited. So there's a lot of editing in my horizon.
Right.
Yeah. And then I don't know, professionally, I'm not really sure where I'm gonna end up.
Yeah, because you mentioned you don't necessarily think you want to be an academic.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, because I don't know. I've asked a lot of academics, and I think it depends what time of day you ask them about.
Could be true, yeah.
What it's like to be one, and I'm kind of like, okay, how hard is it? Sometimes it depends on the person you ask, and it depends on the department you ask. What I'm trying to weigh in, what the future is going to be like. But having said that, I normally just go with the flow, because that's what's happened with my master's degree, with the PhD, kind of going through the path and see what happens.
Got you this far.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Have you done any, through your PhD, any teaching or anything like that?
I've done a couple of workshops.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, my supervisor had mentioned that we could start trying the teaching thing.
Because that can be eye-opening in terms of, do I want to do this?
Yes, exactly. That's what she said. She said, try it out, and some people just like it, some people don't. So, like I mentioned before, I'm an introverted with an extroverted with an expiration.
Yes.
So it really depends.
Yeah.
But that might be an interesting experience.
Yeah, maybe while you're waiting on the thesis to come back from the examiners.
Yes.
That's how you could pass
if it doesn't kill me, right? It didn't kill you, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's right. The last question that I ask everybody, and I'm realizing now that I forgot to warn you about this, so but probably you'll have an answer for me anyway, is what is something outside of all of this, the PhD, the research, maybe even in your case, your professional practice, since that's an extension, that gets you out of bed in the morning, that you're excited about?
Wait, family, aside from family?
Oh, it could be family, yeah, sure.
Does K-drama count?
You'll have to give me a lot of background and context there, because that's...
You don't know
sure.
Korean drama?
I don't.
Oh my God, you need to start.
I do love Korean films.
Yes, Korean drama, you need to start that. I actually do love my work. So I work part-time as a marketing and communications coordinator for a nonprofit. So I love that side. I actually love writing. And yes, it's really hard, but I do like what I'm doing with a PhD. I think I've come to the point in my life where I only do things I like. I was like, I'm too old for that. So so find something that you actually like doing. Yeah. So I don't want to piss people off, but when I wake up in the morning to go to work, I actually like going to work.
That's fantastic.
And actually like doing what I'm doing. And then when I do my PhD and write about stuff and do the creative component, I also do like that. So I actually enjoy those things in my life, and I think being able to put them in one. If I find a job where I can put all these components into one, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings us, we keep coming full circle. We're doing very well. It brings us full circle to something you said right back at the beginning of the episode, about if you don't like what you're doing, it's going to be a long journey.
Yes.
But here you are at the end, and you're saying that it still drives you to get out of bed in the morning and get at it. So
exactly. I think the biggest thing is just not getting enough sleep. I just need to get enough sleep, and everything's okay.
Yep.
And coffee, of course.
Yes, of course.
Coffee in the morning, and I'm pretty okay with what I'm doing.
Everything thereafter,
Yeah.
If you're caffeinated and rested enough, you can handle anything.
Yes, exactly. I actually have a long post-PhD bucket list that I've started writing last year.
Okay.
Of what I want to do once I finish the thesis.
Yeah. Anything you can tell us, like some travel or?
Learn a new language.
What are you thinking?
Korean, so I don't have to read subtitles.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's an important, because I've thought this before about literature that my favorite writer, if I had to pick only one, would be Albert Camus. And it occurs to me that reading him in translation is not...
It's a very different experience,
is not actually reading him. And so I have this motivation to learn French if I could
why not?
read Camus in his native tongue at some point in my life. That would be...
Tomorrow.
It's
tomorrow.
relevant to what you were saying about these. Well, if your books, your Filipino books, are even translated to English, does that capture the nuance?
No, they're actually written in English.
Oh, they're written in English. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, that was one of the things that a lot of people think, because my publisher's in the Philippines. I've been asked that question a lot.
Right.
Like, is it in English or isn't? No, it's in
Yeah.
English. I cannot write in proper Tagalog for the life of me.
Okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's all in English. That's why I guess it was easy to market to Filipinos outside the Philippines as well, because it was in English. And that was the whole point of it, is I wanted to reach Filipinos who grew up somewhere else, so they can read about their culture even though they can't speak Tagalog or their mom's or their parents' dialect. So yeah, that was the whole point of that. So
you're kind of coming just right in that a business person, a manager would call it a gap in the market.
Yes.
But it's a little more philosophical than that. But that's brilliant, because like we were saying before, if you don't have that, if you don't speak the mother tongue, and there's nuance to those languages. I mean, even I joked when I first moved to Australia that I was still learning Australian. And sometimes I do still, when I'm talking to my family back home, I'll drop in some colloquialism.
Yes.
And they'll be like, what now?
What?
But for me, it makes perfect sense. But that language, of course, is a huge part of culture and identity and being able to express those things. And so that's interesting that, you were able to come to kids and others in a language that is their mother tongue.
Yes.
But telling them about their culture. I think that's quite cool.
Yes. With a spattering of Bisaya, which is my dialect. So I made that conscious decision instead of using Tagalog, because I do love putting Bisaya there, because I grew up thinking that Bisaya is an inferior language, because that was instilled in us. If you speak Bisaya, you're from the provinces, you're not as educated.
Okay.
So that was like, when I grew up, that's what we were taught in society. So now that I'm writing in English, if my characters need to speak Filipino, I use Bisaya.
Okay.
I put Bisaya in there. And I think there are other writers and singers or Filipinos who use their mother tongue now. Like, there's that love for language, love for dialect that wasn't there when I was growing up. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Someone should write something about that.
There's another PhD for someone to do.
Someone else.
Maybe even a couple of PhDs.
Yes.
Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for making the time. This has been really fascinating, and I wish you all the best as you finish up.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.